Hello everyone. I hope you all are fine and good. So let's start our today's new topic. It was The Invisible Man. It was a novel. It was a famous novel written by H.G. Wells. Mr. and Mrs. Hall reigned the inn, coach and horses at Epping. One wintry day in February, a stranger came to this inn. He was wrapped from head to feet, and his head was very inch of his face, except the shiny tip of his nose. He was carrying a bag in his hand, and he stepped and shook the snow off himself. Mr. Hall was glad to have a guest in such a serve winter. She lit a fire in a fireplace and started preparing a meal for him. She carried plates and glasses to the guest parlor. At last, although the fire was burning, she was surprised to see that her visitor still wore his hat and coat. He was standing with his back to her and staring out of the window at falling snow in the yard. His gloved hands were clasped behind him and seemed to be lost in the thought. She noticed that the melting snow still wrinkled her shoulders, dropped upon her carpet. "Can I take your hat and coat, sir?" she said. "Give them in a good dry in the kitchen." "No," he said without turning. She was not sure she had heard without him and was to repeat her question. Just then he turned his head and looked at her over his shoulders. "I prefer to give them on this," he said with emphasis. She noticed that he wore big spectacles and had a bush-side whisker over his coat collar, and that completely hid his cheeks and face. "Very well, sir," she said. "As you like in a bit. The room will be warmer." He made no answer and turned his face away. She laid the rest of the table things in a quick staccato and whisked out of the room. And whatever, when she turned, he was still standing there like a man of stone. "Your lunch is served, sir." "Thank you," he said at the same time, and did not stir until she was closing the door. Then he swung round and approached the table with a certain eager quickness. Mrs. Hall went to the kitchen and found that she had forgotten the mustard, and she put the mustard pot on a gold and black tray and entered the room promptly. As she did so, her visitor moved quickly. She saw a white object disappearing behind the table, and he was picking something from the floor. She rapped down the mustard pot on the table, and then she noticed the overcoat and hat been taken off and put over a chair in front of fire, and there were a pair of wet boots threatened rust to steel fender. She went to these things resolutely. "I suppose I may have written to dry now," she said in a voice that broke to denial. "Leave that," said her visitor in a muffled voice, and turning she saw. For a moment she stood gaping at him, too surprised to speak. He was holding a white napkin over the lower part of his face. She tried to speak. "I will dry your clothes now." "Leave the hat and thank you." He looked at the door at her. "Poor fellow. Had an accident, an operation or something," said Mrs. Hall to herself. "What a shock he gave him. Probably his mouth to go disfigured." When Mrs. Hall went to clear away the stranger's lawn, he was smoking a pipe. All the time she was in the room, he never loosened the silk muffle. Her idea that his mouth must also been cut or disfigured in an accident. "I have some luggage," he said at Brimrust, and he asked how he could have it sent. He bowed his handed hat quite politely in acknowledgment of her explanation. "Tomorrow," he said. "There is no speedy delivery," and seemed quite disappointed when she answered, "No." She tried to talk about accident and operations, but he did not give any information about himself. The guest remained in the most of the day. He kept his hat and glasses and a scarf around his neck and lower half, heavy gloves on his hand. Other visitors noticed him and wondered, "Can't a man look at him? Ugly he must be. Probably wanted by the police. So no one can see that man. Everyone is expecting that someone is expected he is been through the accident. Someone is accepting that he is ugly. So many more. But it is an excuse only. So till the time this story is very interesting, read it, just do it. And till that time, say bye-bye.